We received your message, and we understand. We beg you now to return our mother to us so that we can celebrate with her. This is the only way we will have peace. This is very valuable to us, and we will pay.
A man approached that very door on 2 separate occasions. On the first occasion, no one lost their life. The second time, Nancy Guthrie vanished, her final moments captured and then entombed within the FBI's own surveillance recordings, buried within a $6 million ransom note, and echoed inside a legal document signed 9 months prior to the crime, are 7 critical details. 7 points the mainstream media has never connected in one place, until now. Remain with me until the conclusion of this report, because it is detail number 7 that ultimately closes the circle, the one detail that binds all the disparate elements together. And I can assure you, the final 60 seconds of this presentation will fundamentally reshape everything you believe you know about who bears the true responsibility for what transpired with Nancy Guthrie. Before we delve into these 7 details, I must establish a crucial distinction. I have observed other outlets casually mentioning Tommaso Cioni's name, and I want to be meticulous about what is being argued here and what is not. Tommaso Cioni has been officially cleared by the Pima County Sheriff's Department as a direct physical suspect in the disappearance. On February 16th, Sheriff Chris Nanos released a formal statement confirming the entire Guthrie family, encompassing all siblings and their spouses, had been exonerated. His precise words were, "They have been nothing but cooperative and gracious, and they are victims in this case. We are actively examining everyone we encounter in this investigation. Everyone." It's a well-worn cliché, but in our view, every individual remains a suspect. It is simply the way we, as law enforcement, approach these matters. Does this imply we have a primary suspect? No, and the family has been exceedingly cooperative. They have done everything that we have asked of them, and we want that cooperative relationship to persist. That is the official, public stance of law enforcement. We respect that position. We are not here to dispute it. What we are undertaking is something entirely different. We are posing a specific investigative question that the formal clearance leaves unanswered. The question is this: the masked man who materialized at Nancy Guthrie's front door, the armed, gloved, ski-masked figure whom the FBI has now publicly designated as a suspect, that individual executed a crime which demanded a very particular kind of knowledge, not generic information, not something gleaned from an internet search, but specific, intimate, insider knowledge about this family, this exact property, and their financial state. The formal clearance tells us Tommaso Cioni was not the man behind the mask. It does not tell us who supplied the man behind the mask with everything he needed to know. That is the central question, and that is what these 7 details are designed to illuminate. This is the methodology we will employ. For each detail, we will first establish what the masked perpetrator did, the specific action, behavior, or knowledge demonstrated by his conduct. Then, we will ask what kind of individual is necessary to explain that behavior, and we will weigh that profile against the confirmed, sourced facts we have about Tommaso Cioni. This is not a campaign of defamation. This is investigative logic. It is the same methodology federal investigators employ when an individual has been cleared as a physical perpetrator, but remains a person of interest as a potential facilitator. In cases of federal kidnapping, which this is, the distinction between the person who commits the act and the person who enables the act is one of the fundamental questions investigators pursue from the very first day. To enable a kidnapping is a federal crime. Conspiracy to commit kidnapping carries the same sentencing. Exposure as the act of kidnapping itself. A formal clearance does not invalidate that theory. It only narrows the possibility of a direct physical role, leaving the question of facilitation completely open. That is the question we intend to answer. Let us construct the case. On the night of January 31st, 2026, Tommaso Cioni drove Nancy Guthrie home following a dinner at his and Annie's residence. He left her at her front door. He observed her enter the house, and then he drove off. The time was approximately 9:50 p.m. 4 hours later, at 1:47 a.m., the doorbell camera at Nancy's front door was disconnected. Subsequently, at 2:12 a.m., a motion sensor on the property was triggered. At 2:28 a.m., Nancy's pacemaker application lost its connection to her iPhone. By the following morning, she had vanished. Now, Here is the critical detail that no one has yet isolated with sufficient clarity. The masked man did not arrive at 10 p.m. He did not arrive at midnight. He arrived at 1:47 in the morning. To be precise, he arrived nearly 4 hours after the last known family member had departed from that property. This gap in time is not a coincidence. It represents a calculated window of opportunity. Consider what the masked man needed to be certain of in order to appear at that exact moment. He had to possess the knowledge that Nancy had been dropped off at approximately 9:50. He had to know she would retire for the night almost immediately, because an 84-year-old woman with restricted mobility, after a long evening with her family, does not remain awake until 2 in the morning. He had to know that by 1:30 or 1:45 a.m., the residence would be utterly still. The family would be gone. Nancy would be sound asleep. The street would be dark. The moment would be perfect. This is not the pattern of an individual who selected an address at random, arriving with the mere hope that the time was right. This was an act of synchronization. It was orchestrated by someone who knew the evening's exact rhythm, someone aware of who attended the dinner and precisely when it concluded. Tommaso Cioni was intimately aware of the moment he brought Nancy to her door. At that drop-off, he was the sole family member present. He stands alone as the one person, apart from Nancy herself, who could pinpoint the precise conclusion to her evening's timeline. This was the instant the property fell silent, the moment a countdown began toward Nancy being utterly alone and succumbing to sleep. 4 hours after that moment, the masked intruder appeared, moving with the chilling precision of someone who had been given a starting signal. There is no benign explanation for that synchronization, none that doesn't implicate the very person who set the timeline into motion. To be even more direct about this point, professional investigators examining this case have identified a detail that the casual observer often overlooks. The interval between 9:50 p.m. and 1:47 a.m. is not merely a window of opportunity, it represents a specific operational calculation. A 4-hour gap provides sufficient time for a target to progress through an entire nightly routine, a late meal, perhaps a phone conversation, preparing for bed, and then sinking into a state of genuine, deep slumber. Yet, it is not so extended that the pre-dawn hours bleed into a time when neighborhood activity begins to stir once more. Dog walkers, the sleepless, the early risers. 1:47 a.m. is arguably the most silent hour in the Catalina foothills. It is the hour when the probability of a witness dwindles to nearly zero. Whoever informed the masked man of the time to strike did not simply relay a dinner schedule. They conveyed a tactical assessment. They understood that Nancy would likely be deeply asleep within 2 hours of arriving home. They possessed an innate knowledge of the neighborhood's rhythm. They recognized the optimal window for an approach, and they communicated this crucial intelligence, whether deliberately or not. When they passed along the timing of that final drop-off, they engaged in what criminology refers to as an operational handoff. The physical crime is carried out by one individual. The intelligence that makes the act possible is provided by another. These two roles are not always filled by the same person, but without the intelligence, the timing, the access, the knowledge, the physical act itself cannot be executed. The masked figure had no way of confirming Nancy was home, alone, and asleep without someone first giving him the starting point. And the only person who possessed that starting point on the night of January 31st was the individual who dropped her home at 9:50 p.m. For those who are new to this analysis, these reports delve into cases where the mainstream narrative has gone astray. Subscribe and activate notifications so that you never miss an in-depth examination. On February 10th, FBI Director Kash Patel posted directly to X, releasing what he described as previously inaccessible new images, footage salvaged from residual data within the back-end systems of Nancy Guthrie's Nest doorbell camera. This was data everyone had presumed was long overwritten. It was data that Google technicians helped the FBI extract from the deep archives of its cloud backend. The images depicted the armed, gloved assailant, a backpack secured to his shoulders, approaching Nancy's front door under the cover of darkness. But then, a detail emerged that completely altered the interpretation of those haunting images. Fox News Digital was the first to report it. Subsequently, 2 law enforcement sources confirmed the information to NBC News. One of the photographs released by Kash Patel, the one that specifically shows the masked figure without his backpack, was not captured on the morning of February 1st. It was taken on an entirely different day, a prior occasion, weeks before Nancy ever vanished. The FBI has since requested that neighbors in the Catalina foothills re-examine their own security camera recordings, specifically from the night of January 11th. That date is 3 weeks before the abduction, 3 weeks devoted to reconnaissance. We must pause to consider the implications of this. This individual drove to that particular house, on a quiet residential street in a Tucson, Arizona, neighborhood, a full 3 weeks before the crime was committed. He donned a mask and gloves. He approached the front door and simply stood there, studying it. He didn't ring the bell. He didn't create a disturbance. He was just watching, confirming. This is not the methodology of a stranger. This is the signature of someone who has had prior access. It is the action of someone who knows the property so intimately that they can return to it alone and in disguise. Not to learn the layout, but to verify a single, specific detail they need to reconfirm. And this is the critical link. Nancy Guthrie's residence is not publicly identified as the home of Savannah Guthrie's mother. There is no sign, no public document that connects that specific residential address to a national television personality. The circle of people who know that address, who are able to link that house to this family, is exceptionally small. Tommaso Cioni has been to that address hundreds of times. He knows precisely how to reach it. He knows which house it is, on which street. He is familiar with the front entrance, the driveway, the arrangement of the landscaping, and the quality of light there at night. He knows that home with a level of detail one can only acquire through repeated visits over the course of many years. The masked figure seen on January 11th navigated that property with that very same deep familiarity, moving directly to the camera, directly to the door. There was no hesitation, no searching. That is not the behavior of an individual discovering this address for the very first time. Observe the footage with care. The masked figure advances toward the front door of Nancy Guthrie's home, his movements betraying no hint of uncertainty. There is no scanning of the entryway, no fumbling search for a way inside with a flashlight clenched between his teeth. Instead, he reaches to his left with a practiced, deliberate motion, procuring a branch from a nearby shrub. With methodical precision, he uses it to completely obscure the camera's view. That particular shrub is not visible from the street, nor is its presence obvious from a casual glance up the driveway. Its existence and its exact proximity to the surveillance camera is knowledge one could only possess in a very specific way. It is a detail learned only by having stood at that very door, before, close enough and frequently enough to have absorbed the unique geometry of the entrance. This is not a conclusion one arrives at in the dark, disoriented and under pressure. It is something already known, a fact embedded in a mental map of the property, a map constructed by someone who has been to that front door many times. And so, the question must be asked, who holds such a map? A stranger who located this address through a search engine does not possess it. A cartel enforcer with no personal connection to the family does not possess it. A random, opportunistic predator does not possess it. But someone married into this family, someone who has been a guest inside this home and stood at this very door over the course of years, most certainly does. That individual possesses an intimate knowledge of the camera's location, the surrounding foliage, and the precise reach of the landscaping from that specific angle of approach. The masked man navigated that entryway with the physical certainty of a person who had stood there before, because he had. These are the connections that paint a picture far more disturbing than what has been publicly acknowledged. And at this moment, Nancy Guthrie's case demands that people pay attention. We are faced with a question that seems simple on its surface, yet it carries more significance than nearly any other in this investigation. Why the front door? Nancy Guthrie's property, nestled in the Catalina foothills, is a residential home valued at approximately $1 million. A property of that size and in that location offers multiple points of entry: a garage, a side or rear door, and the formal front entrance. The masked man went directly and exclusively to the front door. The point of entry was not the garage, not the back of the house, not a broken window. It was the front door. And it is there that the physical evidence begins to tell its story, where investigators uncovered a blood trail at the very entrance. A trail that DNA testing would later confirm was the blood of Nancy Guthrie, leading from the front door to the edge of her driveway. The blood was found at the threshold. It was not in the bedroom. It was not in the hallway. It was at the door. Nancy came to the front door. She made no attempt to flee. She was not dragged from her bed. She walked to that door, and she opened it. This implies that someone gave her a compelling reason to do so. Former FBI Special Agent Johnny Grusing has addressed this phenomenon publicly. In criminal investigations where elderly victims are found to have opened the door to their attacker, as opposed to a forced entry, investigators immediately search for evidence of behavioral luring, a pretext, a reason so powerful it overrides the primal instinct that tells an 84-year-old woman, alone at 2 a.m, not to open the door for anyone. What could that reason be? It is not the voice of a stranger. It is not a random, unexplained knock. For a woman of Nancy Guthrie's age and character, a devout, sharp-witted woman who had meticulously raised her children, the pretext that opens that door in the dead of night could only be one of two things: an emergency so critical that all caution is cast aside, or a familiar voice she recognized, a name she trusted without question. The last known person to see Nancy Guthrie that evening was Tommaso Cioni. He dropped her off at her home at 9:50 p.m. If a voice called out at 2 a.m, invoking his name, or the name of her daughter Annie, or describing a dire family emergency, Nancy Guthrie opens that door. The masked man chose the front entrance. He then employed a pretext that was tragically effective. And these two facts, when combined, require an intimate knowledge of how Nancy Guthrie conducted her life. Which door she favored, what kind of reason would resonate with her, which name would make her feel secure enough to turn the handle. And here we arrive at the dimension of this that should be the most unsettling. Contemplate for a moment what it takes to construct an effective pretext for a specific individual. You cannot deploy a generic emergency for Nancy Guthrie. This was a woman who, as Sheriff Nanos himself confirmed, was sharp, not cognitively impaired, not easily confused, sharp as a tack. An 84-year-old woman who had witnessed more of the world than most people ever will. She would not be fooled by a vague knock in the darkness. The pretext had to be specifically engineered for her. It had to allude to something or someone she would immediately recognize and respond to without a moment of hesitation. It had to be calibrated to her particular emotional vulnerabilities, her distinct personal relationships, her specific understanding of what constitutes a genuine crisis worthy of opening the door for at 2 a.m. That level of calibration requires intimacy. It requires knowing her not as a name on a property document, but as a person understanding what she cared about and who she would act for. It required knowing the single name or situation that would override an 84-year-old woman's deeply ingrained, reasonable caution. The person who designed that pretext knew Nancy Guthrie on a personal level. They knew exactly how to reach her. Within the Guthrie family, the tight-knit circle of individuals who knew Nancy with that degree of intimacy was composed of relatives and those who had spent years sharing holiday tables and family meals with her. Tommaso Cioni was one of these individuals. He had sat at dinner tables directly across from Nancy. He was familiar with her voice, her sense of humor, her private anxieties. He understood, had he ever paused to consider it, precisely what it would require to coax her to that front door in the dead of night. The bloodstain on that doorstep serves as the physical proof of a deception that succeeded, and a pretext that succeeds with this particular woman on this particular night demanded a perpetrator who possessed a uniquely specific knowledge of her. A ransom demand arrived at the CBS Tucson affiliate KLD-TV on February 2nd. The note demanded $6 million to be paid in Bitcoin. Two deadlines were set, February 5th and February 9th. $6 million, not 10, not 40. 6. Savannah Guthrie's net worth is a matter of public record, estimated at approximately $40 million, with an annual salary of around $8 million. These figures are not concealed. They have been reported in entertainment and financial journals for years and are immediately accessible through a simple online search. So, the question remains, why was the ransom not $40 million, or at the very least 20? Why that specific number? 6. Numerous analysts examining this case have characterized the $6 million figure as being meticulously calibrated to Savannah's liquid wealth. This was not a demand against her worth on paper or her total assets, but rather what she could plausibly gather quickly and discreetly under the pressure of a crisis. It was a sum calculated to avoid the liquidation of real estate, retirement funds, or equity holdings, or long-term investment portfolios, a figure designed to bypass regulatory alarms and months of complex financial reorganization. Now, consider the immense gap between those two amounts. The chasm between $40 million in total net worth and $6 million in accessible crisis funds. To most, these figures would seem one and the same. For high-profile individuals in media and entertainment, they are almost never interchangeable. Wealth of that magnitude is structural, tied up in properties and deferred compensation, locked away in investment vehicles with strict withdrawal periods. The amount of cash one can procure within 48 hours is not a piece of data returned by a Google search. The author of the ransom note was aware of this distinction. They understood that 6 million was the number that would register as credible, sufficiently high to be taken seriously, yet low enough to be realistically achievable under a ticking clock. It was not so exorbitant as to seem like a fantasy, nor so small that it would suggest an amateur with no real understanding of the family. 6 million is the figure one settles upon only when they comprehend the true mechanics of the Guthrie family's finances, not the public image presented on a celebrity wealth website, but its actual day-to-day operational reality. Tommaso Cioni is Annie Guthrie's husband. For years, he has been deeply embedded within the financial reality of this family. He has observed their lifestyle firsthand, not the version described on the internet, but the way they truly live. He is aware of which assets are merely on paper and which are tangible. He knows the limits of Savannah's liquid resources. He knows the number that sounds credible because, in some form or another, that number has been part of the atmosphere surrounding this family for as long as he has been among them. And there is an additional layer to this that has not been given the scrutiny it deserves. The ransom was specified in Bitcoin, not cash, not a wire transfer, but Bitcoin. This represents a highly specific and deliberate choice. The individual who formulated this demand possessed a sophisticated understanding of cryptocurrency, enough to name the precise payment method and to know why. Bitcoin provided the closest thing to an untraceable financial transaction available to a criminal operative. Now, superimpose that technical sophistication onto the financial precision we have been examining. The very same source who knew the exact amount Savannah could gather under duress also knew to demand it through a method that would be virtually impossible to trace to its final destination. That is not the skill set of someone who simply saw Savannah Guthrie on television and decided to orchestrate a crime of opportunity. This points to someone who methodically planned this operation, who constructed layers of operational security around it, and who understood both the victim's financial architecture and the mechanics of anonymous fund collection. That combined profile, intimate financial knowledge plus sophisticated operational security, drastically narrows the pool of potential suspects, and it does so in a direction toward which the 7 details in this investigation consistently point. The person who composed that ransom note knew this family from the inside out. 6 million, not 40, not 1, 6. The $6 million demand, insider knowledge, or a chilling coincidence? Post your analysis in the comments below. We review every submission, and the most insightful responses will be featured. This next detail has been almost completely ignored, yet it may represent the most technically precise piece of evidence for insider knowledge in the entire investigation. Nancy Guthrie had a Nest doorbell camera positioned at her front entrance. It was powered on. It was recording. On the night of February 1st, it was fully functional and capturing footage. However, Nancy did not maintain an active cloud storage subscription. This single detail changes everything, and this is the reason why. Had Nancy possessed an active cloud plan, every second of video would have been automatically uploaded to Google's servers as it was recorded. An assailant could disable the physical camera on the wall, but it would have been entirely futile. Any footage stored in the cloud would be preserved indefinitely, a permanent and accessible record. The Federal Bureau of Investigation could compel its release within hours. But without a cloud subscription, the device records only to its local memory, a finite loop that constantly overwrites itself. To erase the evidence, one simply needs to disable the device. Sever the connection, obscure the lens, and the footage vanishes by its own design. The masked man understood this with chilling precision. He did not merely disable the camera at random. He moved toward it with intent. He deliberately covered its lens. He broke the connection. He performed these actions with the specific knowledge that, without a cloud backup, his movements at the Kite Street door were being systematically purged by the camera's own internal logic. Now, consider this question. How would a complete stranger know if a private residential doorbell camera was subscribed to a cloud service? It is information you cannot discern from the street. It is impossible to tell from the end of the driveway. There is no external light, no signal on the device itself, that communicates to an observer whether it is uploading footage to a remote server or simply storing it locally. This is a detail that exists only within the account settings, buried deep inside the home's private digital architecture. The only individuals who could possibly know whether Nancy Guthrie's camera had an active cloud plan would be the people who installed the device, or perhaps helped maintain it, or were physically present when the choice to subscribe was made. Or they would have to have been close enough to the household, over a significant period of time, to absorb this detail casually the way family members intuitively know the inner workings of each other's lives. Tommaso Cioni is precisely the type of family member who might have assisted an older relative with setting up a smart home device. He might have been there when a subscription was either purchased or allowed to lapse, or he might have simply learned through years of visits about the operational reality of the home's technology. And this single detail acquires a far more sinister weight when you consider it in conjunction with the reconnaissance mission that preceded the crime. Weeks before the abduction, the masked figure was seen on the property. What was he there to confirm, beyond the camera's precise location? He was there to confirm its operational vulnerabilities. He was verifying whether the technical reality of the device on the wall aligned with the intelligence he had been provided. He needed to be certain that it was recording locally, without cloud backup, which meant that disrupting its function would effectively annihilate the evidence. That earlier visit was not merely reconnaissance for a physical crime. It was a mission of technical verification. He was ensuring that the intelligence he was operating on was accurate before he fully committed to the timeline of the attack. This is the behavior of an individual acting on inside information that required in-person confirmation, not the behavior of a person taking a wild guess. This was someone confirming, not guessing. There exists a profound operational difference between those two actions, and that difference reveals everything about how the masked man perceived the credibility of his source. He trusted the information deeply enough to construct an entire criminal enterprise around it. But he was also methodical enough to go and verify it for himself. The person who fed him that information was certain it was correct, because they knew that home intimately. And there is one final detail. Working with Google's back-end engineers, the FBI was able to recover residual data fragments from the system after all. This implies that the masked man's technical understanding of the camera was remarkably accurate, but fell just short of being perfect. He failed to account for the residual data that lingers on back-end cloud servers. Yet being nearly right is still close enough to reveal the sophisticated level of knowledge he possessed. This was not a stroke of luck. This was intelligence. It may have been imperfect intelligence, but it was intelligence nonetheless. This investigation is moving at a blistering pace. Engage your notifications. As every major development surfaces, we will dissect it detail by meticulous detail before any other outlet. We have been building toward this critical piece of the puzzle. It is the one detail that fundamentally reframes everything we thought we knew. In May of 2025, 9 months before Nancy Guthrie vanished, Tommaso Cioni executed a durable power of attorney. This legal document granted his wife, Annie, comprehensive control over his financial and property affairs. 9 full months. Legal analysts who examined this document after Nancy's disappearance categorized it as routine, and they are not wrong. Durable powers of attorney are common legal instruments. They are used in real estate transactions. They are tools for estate planning. They facilitate business arrangements. Signing a power of attorney does not automatically implicate someone in a crime, but it does beg a question that no one has yet been able to answer. For what purpose was this specific document created? A power of attorney is a tool, an instrument designed to execute a specific task, a particular transaction. It addresses a specific legal necessity, a defined moment where one party is unable or elects not to handle their own affairs personally. One does not sign such a document in a vacuum. There is invariably a reason. What was Tommaso Cioni's reason in May of 2025? As of this recording, on March 4th, 2026, day 32 of this investigation, no transaction has been publicly identified that would explain the purpose of that May 2025 instrument. No real estate deal has emerged. No business arrangement, no significant estate event, no major renovation project, no transfer of property. No investment vehicle has surfaced that would have required Annie to hold legal authority over Tommaso's personal affairs. Nothing explains what that document was intended to accomplish. But we do know with absolute certainty what happened 9 months later. Nancy Guthrie was taken. The demand was for $6 million. to be paid in Bitcoin, a digital currency designed for untraceable, anonymous transactions. Had that ransom been paid, the individual who enabled the crime would have found themselves in an exceptionally precarious situation. The legal exposure would be absolute, the financial scrutiny total. Investigators would immediately begin to unravel every thread of their financial life, examining each movement, each individual transaction, and every asset held in that individual's name, unless, of course, their financial world had already been legally placed into the hands of another. A durable power of attorney, an instrument that grants a spouse complete authority over one's financial and property matters, achieves precisely this. While it offers no shield from a criminal investigation, it strategically creates a layer of legal distance between an individual and their own money. The result is that the financial portrait investigator's construct is one where a person's wealth is partially managed by someone else, all under a legal instrument executed months in advance. Let's examine, with greater precision, what this distance signifies in a practical sense. If a ransom of $6 million were to be transferred into a Bitcoin wallet, which by its very nature is untraceable at the point of transfer, the funds would depart from the Guthrie family's control and simply vanish into the intricate, decentralized architecture of the blockchain. As this digital process unfolded, investigators would be scrutinizing every individual within the orbit of the crime, searching for anyone who stood to gain from such a payment. A person whose financial affairs have been legally assigned to their spouses, management months prior to the crime, via a valid instrument with an impeccable paper trail, occupies a fundamentally different legal position than someone whose finances remain directly in their own name. However, this legal separation is not absolute. It doesn't render a person invisible to law enforcement, but it does introduce friction. It erects a barrier of legitimate legal architecture between the suspect and the inevitable follow-the-money analysis. 9 months of meticulous preparation, all before the events of that night began to unfold. Before the surveillance cameras went dark, before the first drops of blood stained the front steps. It was before the ransom note appeared, and before Savannah Guthrie was forced to stand before a camera and plead for proof that her mother was even alive. 9 months. If this analysis is connecting points that have so far remained separate, it needs to be seen. Spreading this information could place it before the eyes of someone who holds a missing piece of this intricate puzzle. Nancy Guthrie remains missing. Now, let us take the sum of these details and measure them against a single, critical question. What sort of individual does the behavior of this masked figure truly describe? He appeared 4 hours after the final family member's visit, an arrival synchronized to a timeline known only to the person who made that last drop-off. He had surveyed the property weeks earlier, moving with an unsettling familiarity. Without hesitation, he moved directly to the security camera. There was no search. Its position was already known to him. He targeted the front entrance, the very door Nancy was known to use, and employed a pretext that compelled her to open it. The ransom demanded was exactly $6 million, a figure reflecting the family's accessible liquidity, not some inflated net worth found on the internet. He was aware the camera lacked a cloud backup and disabled it accordingly, and the legal framework governing a key suspect's finances was quietly restructured 9 months before the crime. 7 distinct details. 7 moments in which the masked man's actions betray a level of knowledge that could not have been obtained from the outside. It had to have come from within. Now, it is crucial to understand why this pattern is so significant beyond its individual components. Any single detail, when isolated, can be rationalized or dismissed. The timing? A mere coincidence. The prior visit? Irrelevant. Knowledge of the camera? A fortunate guess. Viewed in isolation, a defense attorney could dismantle each point, one by one. But that is not how pattern evidence is interpreted. Pattern evidence derives its power from accumulation. When 2 such coincidences appear, they are noted. With 3, they demand closer attention. But when there are 7 independent data points, each one pointing to the same specific category of knowledge, held by the same category of person, what you are observing is no longer coincidence. It has become a signature. The actions of this masked man carry a distinct signature, and it is the signature of someone who was thoroughly briefed. It suggests an individual who conferred, whether in person or by phone, with someone intimately familiar with this family, asking the precise questions a professional criminal requires answered before executing a plan. What time will she be home this evening? Does the camera back up to the cloud? Which door does she typically use? What pretext would cause her to open it? What is the correct number to write in the ransom note? These questions have a source, and that source is the one person who could answer every last one of them from memory. This is a reality well known to the FBI. Historically and statistically, in kidnapping cases targeting elderly victims inside their own homes, the vast majority involve some degree of insider information. Someone within the victim's circle close enough to perceive the vulnerability and understand the value either participates directly in the crime or enables it from the shadows. Clearing the Guthrie family as physical perpetrators does not eliminate this fundamental framework. It merely narrows the focus. Exoneration from the physical act is not exoneration from providing the intelligence that guided it. Investigators are constructing a case, and based on everything we understand about how such inquiries proceed, the case they are building is centered on that exact, haunting question. The question was never just, who did this? It was, who knew? Who possessed the specific knowledge that the perpetrator needed to have? The answer lay within 7 distinct details, and those details led to one answer. It is essential, however, to be precise about what this analysis is and what it is not. We are not suggesting Tommaso is the masked man. He has been officially cleared as a physical suspect in the crime. That clearance is a formal declaration, and we take it seriously. What we are positing is something far more specific. We are asserting that the masked man operated from a base of knowledge that maps, detail for detail, onto the knowledge of an individual who had been deeply embedded within this family for years, and that within the universe of confirmed, sourced facts of this investigation, the one person whose access most precisely mirrors what the masked man knew is Tommaso Cioni. This is an investigative conclusion, built entirely from public evidence. This is not a legal accusation. Every detail presented in this examination has a source. Every claim has been meticulously verified. A fully sourced and pinned comment is available for review, listing every claim made here alongside its corresponding source. If an error is detected, we ask that you identify it. This endeavor is committed to accuracy. If the evidence points in such a clear direction, why has there been no arrest? There was a vast amount of intelligence and numerous leads, but this meant it was time for the real work to begin. They were getting closer, but they were not there yet. The FBI has gathered over 10,000 hours of video footage from the Catalina foothills region alone. 10,000 hours, each one reviewed frame by agonizing frame, enhanced, and meticulously cross-referenced. They are searching for a face, a vehicle, or a pattern of behavior that places a known person at a precise location at a critical time. Such a process does not reach its conclusion in 30 days. The DNA evidence retrieved from the home was complex, containing the genetic material of more than one individual. These mixed DNA profiles are substantially more challenging to work with than samples from a single source. Investigators submitted the material to the National FBI database, which, as of early March, returned no matches. Genetic genealogy testing is now in process. This is the same advanced technique that identified the Golden State Killer and connected Brian Koberger to the Idaho murders. But that forensic analysis requires time, weeks, and sometimes even longer. The Ozark Trail backpack, identified publicly by Sheriff Nanos as one of the investigation's most promising leads, has yet to produce an identification. Authorities initially concentrated on Walmart's purchase records. As of March 2nd, Nanos confirmed that investigators now theorize the backpack may not have been acquired through a Walmart register. An alternative acquisition channel is currently being traced. And there is another element, one that receives little attention when the public asks why charges have not been filed. Indicting the wrong person in a case this prominent, with this level of federal engagement, under this degree of intense national media scrutiny, and involving a family with this kind of public platform, is not an error from which the prosecution could ever recover. The FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office are building a case intended to survive every legal challenge that a well-resourced defense team can possibly mount. This requires more than a strong circumstantial argument. It requires undeniable physical evidence, exhaustive digital forensics, detailed financial records, and complete communications data. It demands DNA that definitively closes off every other possible explanation. That web of evidence is being constructed at this very moment. The investigation is now in its evidence consolidation phase. What we are observing in the public domain, the relocated command post, the ongoing DNA analysis, the The review of vehicle records is the fundamental infrastructure of a prosecution being carefully pieced together, not the fading trail of an investigation that is losing its momentum. And then there is the matter of Annie's car. Annie Guthrie's vehicle was confiscated by law enforcement in early February. The family was formally cleared of involvement on February 16th, on day 32 of the investigation. As of this recording, that car has not been returned. When law enforcement clears a family as physical suspects, standard operating procedure is to return their property. Former FBI Special Agent Brianna Fox explained the protocol publicly. Law enforcement agencies return property only after they have gleaned every fragment of information and collected all possible evidence they could. Annie's car had not been returned by day 32. Something in, on, or connected to that vehicle remains of critical interest. A vehicle from the Guthrie household is still actively providing information to this investigation. The case did not go cold. The FBI moved its command post from Tucson to its Phoenix field office, a strategic shift giving the team access to the powerful infrastructure needed for large-scale digital forensics. A senior law enforcement official affirmed to NBC News that the relocation was specifically designed to best facilitate the complex evidence review. The case did not go cold, it burrowed deeper. When the arrest finally occurs, and the entire pattern of this case strongly indicates that it will not come as a surprise. In hindsight, everything that we have laid out in this analysis will be seen as having pointed toward the same conclusion the entire time, because that is how these cases ultimately find their resolution. Not with a sudden revelation appearing from nowhere, but with the slow, methodical accumulation of evidence that eventually catches up to a theory that was correct from the earliest days of the investigation. The story told by the physical evidence, however, is one that takes time to emerge. Unearthing the digital trail is a meticulous process. Navigating the labyrinth of financial subpoenas is an exercise in patience. Genetic genealogy is a meticulous, time-consuming process. Yet the underlying logic of an investigation, a distinct pattern of 7 crucial details, all converging on a single source of knowledge, remains immutable as physical evidence slowly surfaces. It only becomes more certain. This is a familiar narrative, one that is unfolded in analogous cases time and again. In the case of the Idaho student murders, investigators were already building a theory around Brian Kohberger long before the forensic evidence definitively sealed his fate. The pattern illuminated a path, and the physical evidence eventually followed. A similar story emerged from the Golden State Killer investigation. A psychological profile, one that sketched an insider, a familiar offender, was constructed decades before genetic genealogy finally gave it a name. In each instance, the theory preceded the proof. The 7 details presented here constitute the theory. The FBI is now tasked with constructing the proof. And in investigations of this nature, where the required insider knowledge is so extraordinarily specific, so traceable, and so deeply consistent across 7 distinct and independent points of data, the arrival of proof becomes a near certainty. It is not a question of if, it is a question of when. This is one installment in our comprehensive series on the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie. The complete playlist is available for viewing. Explore our analyses of the sheriff's investigation, the FBI profiler theories, and the forensics of the ransom note. We recommend watching them in sequence. But for now, let us return to the very beginning. Twice, a figure approached that door. The first time, he came under the cover of a cold January night, weeks before the abduction. He was masked and gloved, his gaze fixed on a security camera he was already aware of, methodically verifying the location of a shrub he knew was close at hand. His attention then turned to the door itself. He was absorbing everything. The ambient light, the optimal angle of approach, the precise geography of the entryway. Then, without a sound, he departed. He was not yet prepared to act, but that time was coming. The second time, he returned. He obscured the camera lens with a branch from the very shrub he had scouted. He moved to the front door, the specific one he knew she would answer, and employed a carefully chosen pretext designed to reach her. An 84-year-old woman, who had bid her family goodnight just hours before, was lured to that door, and she opened it. And then she vanished. Both of these visits were built upon an identical foundation, a deep, intimate knowledge, an insider's map of the family's home, their daily lives, and their true financial standing. That map had to be provided by someone. Whether deliberately or through sheer negligence, In a single conversation or through a lifetime of privileged access, someone delivered that information to the man who materialized at her door. The FBI's hunt for the man in the mask continues, but what is becoming chillingly clear is that he could not have orchestrated any of this on his own. 7 details. 1 unifying thread. The abductor's movements were perfectly synchronized with a timeline that, on that particular evening, was controlled by a single individual. He conducted a preliminary survey of the property, displaying a pre-existing familiarity. He navigated the entryway not with hesitation, but with the assurance of someone who had been there before. He knew precisely which door to approach, which pretext to use, and which person to target. He was aware of the exact amount of money this family could realistically access, not a fantasy figure from a celebrity net worth profile. He understood the specific mechanics of the security camera's data storage. And then there is this. 9 months before the crime, the legal framework governing the suspect's household underwent a quiet, formal restructuring. It is time to state what the mainstream media, whether through an abundance of caution or a lack of care, has failed to articulate plainly. These 7 points of data do not, in themselves, prove that Tommaso Cioni is responsible for what befell Nancy Guthrie. They fall short of establishing guilt by any legal definition. What they do establish is a far more unsettling proposition than a simple accusation. They demonstrate that the masked perpetrator could not have succeeded without access to the kind of specialized knowledge possessed by someone like Tommaso Cioni. And, based on the publicly confirmed record of this investigation, the individual who most accurately fits the profile of the knowledge holder is Tommaso Cioni. Herein lies the chasm between a formal clearance and the relentless demands of investigative logic. The sheriff's department may have cleared Cioni as the physical assailant, but no one, not the FBI, not the sheriff, and not in any future prosecution, has resolved the critical question of who supplied the intelligence that made this crime possible. That question remains wide open. It is the very heart of this investigation, and every single detail we have examined acts as a vector, pointing inexorably toward the same conclusion. This is not a series of 7 unfortunate coincidences. This is a singular base of knowledge, a knowledge base that belongs to someone who once sat at that family's dinner table. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old. She lives with a heart condition and is dependent on daily medication. She has now been missing for 32 days. Her family waits in agony. If you possess any information, the FBI tip line is 1-800-CALL-FBI. Tips can be submitted online at tips.fbi.gov. The family is offering a reward of up to $1 million for her safe return. On February 4th, Savannah Guthrie faced the cameras with a plea. "We want to hear from you. We are ready to listen." 32 days have passed, and her mother is still missing. We will continue to follow this investigation. We will report on every development, analyze every detail, and explore every connection overlooked by the mainstream press, until Nancy is brought home or until those responsible are forced to answer for their actions. Follow our continuing coverage for every update in this case. We invite you to share in the comments which of the 7 details you believe forges the most compelling link between Cioni and the masked man. In the end, the most incisive analysis becomes the one that anchors the entire investigation.